So now let's assume that we actually had some ethanol being produced. So let's think about an equilibrium that has some ethanol production. So here's the demand for corn for feed. Here's the supply of corn for feed. Supply of corn. I'm sorry, I don't want to put this here. Let me start over. Think about two uses. Here's the demand for feed. This is a quantity of ethanol that's going into feed. Corn going into feed. Now we're going to have an ethanol market. This is a quantity of corn going into feed, into ethanol. Corn for ethanol. Now, which of these markets do you think is going to be more elastic? Think about it. Where is the market likely to be more elastic? This one? Why? Think about it. What's going to determine the elasticity of demand for corn for use with ethanol? Ethanol is going to compete against a wide range of fuels out there, like oil. And ethanol is going to be a real small part of that marketplace. Because it's going to have a very small share of that in use, that's going to tend to make its demand pretty elastic. Because there's lots of oil out there for it to substitute for. Right? That is, let's assume ethanol can be switched gallon for gallon with gasoline up to a certain level, then this demand curve might be very elastic. Okay?
Isn't the same true for the feed? I mean, corn competes with a lot of other types.
But corn is a much bigger share of the feed market than it is of the fuel market, right? I would agree that kind of in principle, corn is one of many feeds. It's also one of many fuels, but it's a big part of the feed market and a small part of the fuel market. What else would you want to say? What are the major substitutes for corn as an animal feed?
I don't know exactly, but the logic is...
But think about what the other key substitute, what's the other big substitute as an animal feed? Grass, soybeans, right? What do his buddies grow in addition to growing corn? Yes. That is, they're going to benefit from the higher price of soybeans just like they benefit from the higher price of corn. That's like my earlier example. You might say, well, geez, people could substitute the soybeans. From his buddy's point of view, go drive through Iowa. They're growing corn and soybeans. So substituting to soybeans is perfectly fine from their point of view. Because that means you may get less of an increase in the price of corn, but you're going to get an increase in the price of soybeans as well. All right, so you're going to get both of them put together. Think about the extreme case where the demand for ethanol feed, corn for ethanol, is perfectly elastic. This demand curve is perfectly flat. Then what would the market demand curve, the total demand for corn, look like? Well, of course, the way you add demand curves is add them horizontally. So we'd end up with a total demand for corn that would look like that. All right? So let's assume that the supply of corn, you need a bigger chalk. Supply of chalk is too low. Anyway, here's the total supply. So this would be the market equilibrium price of corn. Now, our friend who got his job in government says, all right, guys, I'm going to subsidize the use of ethanol in corn. Corn for ethanol. I'm going to do that subsidy. that's going to shift this horizontal demand curve up by the amount of the subsidy, which is going to shift this demand curve up like that, which means the price is going to rise, call that the initial price, plus the subsidy. That is, the price is going to rise by the full amount of the subsidy in this case. The cost to the government of the subsidy is going to be based on how many units of ethanol are sold, right? That is the use of ethanol for corn, which is going to be measured by what? How much corn is going into ethanol now? How about that much? Correct? The benefits, the cost to me as the government of paying the subsidy is equal to that area, which is the quantity of corn going into ethanol times the subsidy per unit. But my buddies also get to collect not just the subsidy on those units, but the subsidy on all the units that are sold in the corn market for feed. We saw this example already, right? What example did we see already? When I talked about the rise in the price of foreign oil and that it would push up the price of domestic natural gas. That's the same principle here. That is, because there's substitution, in this case, not on the demand side, but on the supply side, between supplying corn to the ethanol market and supplying corn to the feed market, I'm going to drive both prices up at the same time. So my friends are going to benefit from that higher price, not just on the feed, the part that's paid by the government, the subsidy in the oil market, they're going to benefit in the feed market as well. So in this example, there's this part of the subsidy that's not collected. That is, there's some part of what the government's paying that doesn't fully go to the corn farmers, but there's a big part over here that they do collect that the government's not paying. So one of the reasons why farmers might like an ethanol subsidy much more than a check is it not only gets them a higher price on corn used for ethanol, but gets them a higher price on the corn they're selling already to people for feed.